This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before and were inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house surrounded by woods and dirt road. The house itself gave me an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off. The paint on the house seemed to be fading. It was an old piece of crap now that I think about it, but at the time I was nervous and excited. I remember walking in after I stared at the house for what seemed like 20 minutes. Surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the outside, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. I remember the smell of the house. I can't pinpoint it, but it was different, like walking into a musty room. I started to walk around, just to explore my surroundings, but I noticed Kat's mom watching me. I simply smiled and waved, but she just stood there staring at me wide-eyed. I've never met her before, but why was she looking at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me. We both fell and started to giggle. I noticed Kat's mom out of the corner of my eye start to turn around and walk off. She was gone, just like that. Fast forward a couple hours. Kat and I are laying on a beanbag in her room watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favorite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King or any movie my mom was watching. Not her decision, mine, because I love the feeling that a good horror movie gives you. She felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. Back to the story. We were sitting here watching this movie, and suddenly the door opposite us slams closed. We both jumped, giggled, and brushed it off because, well, we were kids. Until the second time, when it creaked open and slammed again, not even seconds after the first time. Now I'm sitting there staring at this door trying to figure out how in the hell it's opening and closing by itself. In the midst of all that, the only other person in this house is her mom, who I figured out earlier was just a tad bit creepy. "You think it's just your mom?" I asked her, but she shook her head. "You sure?" I asked again, but she said something that gave me chills, and still gives me chills, just telling this story. "My mom isn't home, it's just me and you, silly." I just stare at her while she's staring at me, trying to wrap my head around what she had just told me. "Where is your mom?" I asked her. "She's at work." I giggled, thinking that she was just trying to trick me. "She is at work. She only works for a couple hours, so she leaves me here because she trusts me." At this point, I'm just looking at her, and she noticed this look of concern on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "If your mom is at work, then who was that lady looking at me earlier?" As I said this, we heard what seemed like footsteps at the time, but thinking about it now, it sounded like shuffling in one spot above us. I'm completely terrified at this point. Every hair on my neck is standing on end, and I just want to leave. I start to get up when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I had heard the noise. I nodded. It was silent again until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both gazed up at the ceiling and she grabbed my hand. "This happens every day," she whispered. I look over at her and can truly see the fear on her face. The footsteps stopped and she looked at me, her face flushed white. "Is there an attic?" I asked. She pointed up toward the ceiling. "Well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds," I kept thinking over and over. "You ever notice when you're really quiet? That's when you can hear almost everything around you. Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend alone at 10 years old and you hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no younger brothers or sisters. We were completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was. I remember thinking that I just wanted to get out of the house. Just grab her and run out the door. At least we would feel safer and less scared outside than we would in. "Want to hear a story?" Kat asked, pulling my mind back to reality. I nodded. Well, this house used to be a daycare. There was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them in the attic and then hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. They all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty and no one found them for months. In this house. My heart started to pound. My eyes were wide with fear. "It's true," she said. "I've seen them, the little kids, every day. But I never saw the lady, but you have. Earlier." After she told me this, I don't remember much else aside from running out the door of her room and making it outside that house. Kat followed, begging me to stay, but I just had to leave. My stomach felt like it was in knots. I felt like I had walked into a horror movie myself, and just wished that this day had never happened. Fast forward to years later. That was the last day that I had seen or heard from Kat. I remember her always coming to play outside at my dad's during the day. I remembered what she looked like. I remembered meeting her parents and seeing them out in public. I'm now 27, and I can't seem to find any proof that she even existed. All my friends that I was friends with then, I'm still friends with now, even after all these years. But why not her? I drove by that house maybe 15 times, and still wonder if maybe she was just one of the ones that never made it out. I have an attic in my house, and ever since I was young, I hated going up there. It was dark, 'cause there was no light, and it was always absolutely freezing. It had a really bad energy, and my anxiety would skyrocket whenever I had to go up there with my dad. It felt like someone had set a timer, and time was running out, if that makes sense. It was like I had to get out of there ASAP, or something would happen. In 2016, my parents decided to convert the attic and make it into their bedroom. After this happened, I noticed a lot of unexplainable events. One day, I was off from school and I was home alone. I was lying on my bed watching Jeremy Kyle show clips with both of my cats on the bed with me. Then I heard what sounded like someone walking down the stairs from the attic. It's a very distinct sound, and I knew it was the stairs creaking as they were new and didn't normally make any noise. I paused the video and listened. I didn't hear anything, so I continued watching, now a little on edge. 2 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again. Peanut, my cat, started hissing and meowing and went to the end of my bed and hid. At this point, I was tearing up. I somehow managed to get out of bed and pull my dresser in front of my door. I sat in front of the door and called my dad, sobbing. I explained to him what was happening, and he said, "Go out of my room and look." Hell no. I begged him to call my neighbors to come in and get me. It was only after I called my dad 5 times, he kept hanging up on me, that he called my neighbors. One of my neighbors, who have a key, came in. I flew down the stairs, sobbing and shaking. My neighbor checked the house, but no one was there. I didn't feel safe staying home for weeks after this. My best friend and I would hang out after school at my house most days, and whenever we did, we would always hear noises from upstairs. One time in particular, we were in the kitchen making noodles, and we heard banging. I assumed it was my cat and didn't think much of it. My friend then shushed me and said to listen. From upstairs, I could hear the sound of someone opening and closing a chest of drawers and slamming my wardrobe open and shut. Now my cats are loud, but how on earth does a cat open up a drawer? It's a very distinct sound. We ended up waiting in my back garden holding a paint scraper and a knife until my dad came home. This is by far one of the scariest ones. My dad called up the stairs to me and said he was going to the shops. Once he left, I went downstairs to grab some food. I asked my sister if she wanted anything to eat, and she said yes. She was in the front room, so I was talking to her from the kitchen. My dad knocked on the door, and I yelled at her to get it. She didn't. I went to answer it, giving it to her for being lazy. When I opened the door, in came my dad and my sister. After months of noises, banging, hearing people talking and walking around when I was home alone, I was sick of it. I felt anxious to be in my own home, and I had other things to worry about. So one day I decided to try to talk to whatever it was that was in my house. I didn't use a Ouija board. I just sat on my stairs and had a chat, I guess. I told him that I respect that they were in this house before I was, but that they were scaring me and stressing me out. I asked if they would be able to leave or at least stop frightening me. After this, I've never had anything happen in my house. No banging or noises. I think that it was the spirits of the previous owners, a nice elderly couple who sadly died in the house of natural causes. My mom and I moved into a house when I was in the 5th grade. For the record, I'm 25 now. And there was a room in the attic that looked like it was actually built to be part of the house and not some makeshift DIY room. The attic was also not your typical attic with a pull-down door, but a walk-through door. Anyway, the layout was that it made an L shape, and all wooden, and the room was obvious at the end of the L. We used the attic for Christmas decorations and whatnot. But anyhow, on with the story. I turned the room into my little hangout area. The only thing in there when we moved in was a wooden table with 4 chairs and then some weird bench that I hear was a bed, but it didn't look big enough. So me and my friends would always go in there to hang out, play games and whatnot. Well, one day I accidentally broke the table and was worried that my mom was going to be mad at me. I don't think she would have cared since the stuff was so old. But out of fear, I just grabbed all the stuff that I owned and left the room, closing the door behind me. I think I remember once going back in there a few years later, like 9th grade maybe, but never actually spent an extended period of time. I would always stack the Christmas decorations in front of the wall and door to it. The year before we moved, we decided to move everything into the garage after Christmas for my senior year in high school. That way we didn't have to deal with it when the movers showed up. We never used the garage anyway, but got rid of lots of stuff the year prior, so we had plenty of room. That was the last official time I saw the door. But the absolute last time I stepped foot in that house, the stuff was all packed away, on the truck preparing to leave, and I was doing one last walkthrough when I decided to go into that room and make sure that I didn't forget anything and leave it behind. I went to go to the attic, and it was missing. Nothing but a blank wall. Like there was no way a room could have ever even have been there. I was shocked and asked my mom, but she had no idea. I even called my friends to verify, and yeah, they all remembered the room, but she didn't. It was odd. Very odd. I never felt anything weird about the room at all. Like, I'm pretty sensitive to paranormal stuff, and this just seemed like some random room. The house, in my opinion, was haunted because a guy hung himself in the living room, but I don't believe that that was connected. I live in England in a 2-story flat, and I have always believed in the paranormal. But my dad does not believe in any type of ghost or anything supernatural. I never thought that this flat was haunted. However, as I got older, I started to feel uncomfortable by myself, and I saw shadows downstairs out of the corner of my eye. Now, there is an attic directly above our 2nd floor, but there is no way for us to enter it, as you cannot access it from this flat. The only way to access this attic is by having a specific key that can open the attic, as it is council flats, which is above my neighbor's house. However, the attic above my flat is the only one which is blocked off, and there is no way to enter it. I have the last flat on the end of these 18 council flats. There are no neighbors above us, just the attic, which no one can access without that key, and they would still not be able to get above our flat. One night about 2 years ago, all of the family was in bed, and it was about 3 in the morning. All of a sudden, I heard something crash above. It was so loud that it woke all my family members up, and we all got up and stood on the landing together. After that bang, we heard 3 loud footsteps, and the sound of something being dragged behind these footsteps. It was so scary, as we know that nobody can physically get up there. My dad was not convinced that it was a ghost. He thought that somebody had somehow gotten into the attic, so he went outside to check if the communal attic door was opened. I followed him outside, and it was completely padlocked shut with heavy chains around the lock. I tried to explain to him, how can there be anyone up in our part of the attic when it's blocked off and impossible to get into? We came back into the house, and we were all quite shaken up. My brother was young and was able to get to sleep, but I was awake all night. After this experience, I started to smell old cigarette smoke every time I would enter my toilet, and it was so stale and stagnant. After the event, me, my brother, and my mom were going away on holiday, whilst my dad had to stay there and work. He told me he slept with his headphones in every night, as even he felt uncomfortable by himself. As a family, we still have no idea what those noises were, and since then we have heard many strange things. When I was a kid, I lived in a one-story house that had a very small space that you could consider an attic. We didn't keep anything up there because it was such a small space. I don't even know where the entrance to it was, if there was one. But, and this started right as we moved in, after we would go to bed, I lived with my grandparents, I would start hearing footsteps up there. I knew they were footsteps because they would move in a rhythm and go from one end of the house to the other. I lived in that house from when I was 8 to 12 years old, and this happened every night. I repeatedly tried telling my grandparents about this, and they always said it was just the house settling. I was never able to sleep well as a kid, so while my grandparents would be asleep as soon as 8 p.m. struck, I would be lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling. It was always the most terrifying when the footsteps stopped right above me, like right over my bed, and then in a few seconds to minutes they would walk back to some other location up there. Nobody ever believed me that this was happening. My granddad had even found holes that had apparently been drilled in several of the walls, one in the bathroom, and he wrote it off as a previous owner running cables through the walls. Lived in that house for 4 years, and was convinced that someone was living in the ceiling above us and would become active when they thought that we had gone to sleep. I'll never forget that. It always happened at the same time of night, right after we went to bed. This was back in the late 90s to the early 2000s, so I don't know if there could have been cameras or something that they could have been watching us on, but they definitely knew when we went to bed. I'm still to this day convinced that someone was up there. Paranormal? I don't know. It's worth mentioning that one of the previous owner's kids did die in the house. They had a wolf-dog hybrid as a pet that mauled him in the living room. Anyway, I thought I'd share that because literally no one believed me, ever, to this day. But I know that footsteps are different from houses settling. This would go on into the wee hours of the morning, and I would usually finally pass out when the footsteps had gone off to a different part of the house. My family and I moved into a new house. It used to have an attic, but it's been sealed off. After a couple of months into living in this house, sometimes I'm just watching TV and I hear scratching from the roof. I just play it off as a bird, as they're common where I live. After 3 weeks, the scratching has gotten worse and more frequent. It's like it's trying to scratch its way out of the roof. By the way, the attic entrance thing is above the outside of my sister's room. One day my sister tells my dad that the seal is open. My dad gets confused because it was supposed to be sealed off completely. My dad goes to close it and realizes that it's really hard to open and close, so whatever opened it was strong. That's when I start to get skeptical. The same night I go to get some snacks from the fridge, I open it to find out that they are all gone. I thought my siblings must have eaten them. In the morning, my parents are going on about a missing cake. The cake was supposed to be for my niece's birthday. They asked if I had anything to do with it, and I said no, along with all my other siblings. I was getting really suspicious about the attic, so I built up the courage to go and check it out. Note that I am probably the most paranoid person in the world, so I was scared for my life, but my curiosity got the best of me. I get the ladder, a torch, and a knife just in case. I open the entrance. I shine my torch to see nothing. But as I search more, I see the cake, empty snack packets, dirty clothes, and a short, dark silhouette. It just freezes in place. Immediately, I bolt and scream for my parents and tell them everything. They tell me to stay in my room. They go up and check, but there was no one there. I'm still shaken from that moment and get nightmares from it. We have since moved from that home and now live a normal, non-scary life. When I, a 24-year-old female, was younger, around 5, my family moved into an old house on the upstairs floor. An older couple lived below us. This was a long time ago, and I was really little, but I remember this all so vividly. When we were first moving in, my mom had to go up to the attic, which, coincidentally, the door was in what would be my room. She took me and my younger brother up with her because I'm assuming she didn't want to leave us unsupervised. I remember not liking it up there, and then the light turned off. Both my brother and I started screaming about red eyes. I do remember them. It wasn't just one. It was a bunch or a few. I couldn't tell you how many. It turns out that the light turning off was my dad because he didn't think anyone was up there. He turned the light back on and asked what was going on, and me and my brother were still hysterical. The thing is, no one remembers this but me. Not even my brother. I chalk it up to a bad nightmare, except for the fact that I remember every detail. And it turns out a mother had drowned her baby in that attic, and my parents had experiences there as well. I feel like that house was the start of my acknowledgement or awareness of the paranormal. I'm renting a house currently with some of my friends, and since we moved in this summer, there was an attic door that had a lock on it from our landlord. Well, me and my friend got curious and decided to try and pick the lock. We ended up getting the combination, and when we went up there, I took 3 photos. One is of the front window, one of the back, and one was of an odd postcard on the ground. I sent a photo to a friend, and without me realizing, there was a very clear face in the window with distinct features, eyes, nose, mouth, and head shape. Prior to this, there had been no experiences in the house besides some odd noises. My housemate claims he saw the same face in a different window today, after we locked the attic back up. I'm scared that we may have woken something, and I honestly want nothing to do with it. In 2007, I moved into the house I currently live in. It's over 100 years old, and ever since I can remember there have been weird or creepy things that occur. Recently, I've heard noises late at night while I'm in bed. For context, I sleep on the top floor of my house, and it's been getting really creepy. Another thing is that in the hallway we have an attic door that's bolted shut and hasn't been opened by our family or my neighbors who used to live here from what I have been told. I decided to ask my father about it, and he told me that it wasn't a full-size attic, and is more of a crawl space which goes right over my room. And the part that creeps me out the most is that we've never had any animals besides the occasional mouse in our home, which makes me think that what I'm hearing doesn't sound like an animal at all. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed these true scary stories, and if you did, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for me along with that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest content. To have your own horror story featured, feel free to submit it to me via the email included below in the description. Also down there you can find the links to other playlists with lots more awesome creepy content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Until then, don't forget to embrace the terror.